Hello, everyone, and thank you for being here today. I would like to present my research for my master is in German studies that I completed just last month. So I focused on techno party in the context of micro festival, comparing events in the French Grand West, but also in the German states of Berlin and Brandenburg. So it's two regions which are very rich in terms of technocultures, but shaped by distinct historical, socioeconomic, and cultural factors. So here are a few images to give you a sense of the atmosphere of these events. Yeah, and this map shows the regions that have been studied. So the French Grand West has several definitions depending on the context, but I focus on this one because I think it's the most relevant for electronic music culture. And also, yes, Berlin and Brandenburg in the north of Germany. So although micro festivals have been around for several years, they have gained visibility since the pandemic due to their compatibility of the format with health restriction and also with open air settings. So studying them helps us to understand the ongoing festivalization of culture, which is reconfiguring the meaning of celebration and also raising questions about an era in which the local and the global politics and culture, heritage and tourism are becoming increasingly intertwined. So festivalization emerged after World War II, gaining popularity in Western countries. So by the late 90s, festivals expanded beyond the arts and affect all kind of human expression. They have become a label of, but also an appeal because of their flexibility. And also of the ability to bring together diverse audiences. Some of them were so large that researchers such as, for example, O'Sullivan or Jackson spoke about mega event or big bangs, so referring to large-scale urban events that receive global media coverage and are mainly organized for tourists and residents to promote economic growth in cities. So in the French Grand West, the festivalization of cultural life emerged from the folk movements that began in the 50s. And this movement was driven by a desire to modernize Breton heritage and assert a regional identity. And in Berlin, festivals also served to build a collective identity, even if it was not based on heritage. So during the Cold War, this identity took very different form, reflecting liberal values, like during the Bowie's concert in West Berlin, are shaped by the socialist spirit of the parades on the other side of the wall. So following the fall of the wall, a second wave of festivals emerged, symbolizing rebirth and unification. So these events helped to establish Berlin's creative and cosmopolitan image, and were also an opportunity to overcome the tensions of the past through celebration. So in the French Grand West, this second wave of festivals emerged at the turn of the millennium as a result of national cultural policies under the culture minister Jacques Lang. These policies promoted events as a means of territorial and identity development. But however, local dynamics also played a role, particularly in Grand West, where there was an extensive network of association. Yes, but today European festivals face progressively limits, for example, logistical gigantism, energy dependence, spatial artificialization, pollution, etc., etc. So And also the terms festival itself has become blurred, now covering vastly different events. So following Kudney, I define a festival as an organized social-spatial phenomenon taking place at a specially designed time outside the everyday life, shaping social capital and celebrating elements of tangible and intangible human culture. So micro-festivals fit this definition, but are distinguished by their small size. So while some researchers set the threshold at around 5,000 people, I would consider that a range of between 200 and 1,000 to be more appropriated. So because below this threshold, micro-festivals are just community gathering. And above it, they're just growing logistical and economic constraints, which erode the intimacy and self-management that define them. So yes, so beyond the pandemic, micro-festival can be seen as a response to the rapid expansion of the festival scene in Europe. And beyond. So the health crisis encouraged deeper reflection on the social, ecological, cultural impact of large-scale events, and yes, and micro-festivals appeared as a meaningful alternative. Yeah. So in the case of techno parties in particular, the transition to a festival format has significantly impacted the essence of the movement itself. So the festival setting may influence musical aesthetics, the economic structure of scenes, the relationship between artists and also the audiences, and also every kind of every form of sociability in general. So in Berlin, major festivals such as, for example, the Love Parade that I put in the slide, and smaller events such as Astropolis in Brest, in Brittany, have brought techno to the attention of a wider audience. And so at the turn of the millennium, so Berlin's techno scene evolved from an underground movement born in the city post-industrial wastelands into a globalized commercial cultural model, exemplified by the Love Parade. And yes, in the 90s, Brittany has also been a popular destination for raves. So the concept of free party introduced by travelers fleeing Thatcherism flourished, then thanks to the already established association network, but also festivals. And yes, electronic music has helped to dispel the image of Brittany as an isolated and also archaic region. So as demonstrated by Astropolis, Panorama or Pacotizen, there are some festivals in Brittany. So while these festivals preserve the original aesthetic, try to preserve the original aesthetic and vibe of raves, they are part of a more institutionalized and commercial dynamic that's sometimes far removed from the ideals of autonomy and the resistance of free party. So yes, we can see the common point between these two areas. So in this context, micro-festivals seem to offer an alternative to large electronic dance music festivals, which often erase the original meaning of techno parties. So when I registered for this Night Studies conference, I had not finished my research, so I therefore gave my presentation with the title Back to Basis, the techno party in a micro-festival context, France and Germany. But this title was then clarified, and in particularly the phrase, the expression back to basis because it's very problematic. It assumes that the origin of techno is unique and very clear. But since the 80s, the techno movement is the result from circulation, hybridation, reappropriation of a lot of genres and styles, but also territories, including Detroit, New York, Chicago, but also in Europe. So talking about return to the roots risks oversimplifying this complexity and reducing microfestival to a backward-looking logic, but it's not the case. So finally, I asked myself the following question. So to what extent can microfestivals provide an alternative to medium-sized and gigantic techno festivals? And thus restoring meaning to techno parties. From a methodological point of view, I've combined the lecture of academic references such as Maus, Van Gennep, or Kaiwa with qualitative interviews. Here are some festivals that I studied. We cannot very see in Germany, but yeah. So my research shows that although micro festivals have gained prominence during the pandemic in France and in Germany, the dynamics behind their creation differ. So in France, the crackdown on electronic culture, which has been in place since 1993, and was reinforced by the LCQ law in 2001, and also the current anti-rave bill has prompted many organizers of illegal techno parties to establish their own festivals, freeing them from the fear of equipment seizure, but also police raids. And the organizers of the Grand Ouest festivals interviewed for the study often linked to the free party scene. So there is really interaction between these two contexts. And in Berlin, however, the electronic scene enjoys official recognition. So German techno was listed by UNESCO in 2023. And a buzz, so conducive to micro-festival creation. But gentrification is threatening certain iconic venues. So there is a paradox between the techno capital and the gradual disappearance of party spaces. In terms of the vibe of techno parties, my research shows that micro festivals are part of a continuum of practices inherited from raves and free party, both in France and Germany, without claiming to restore the movement's original identity. So also legalization and professionalization involve commercializing services, which sometimes conflicts with the ethics of free party. So micro-festival organizers strive to uphold these principles. So, for example, inspired by the early London free parties, where some systems such as DIY or Tonka refused to charge admission, some have introduced solidarity pricing, for example, arguing that music should be free for everyone who wants to come. And each interview revealed that venue selection is a critical factor in micro-festival organization. So there is two strategies, seizing an opportunity on private land or illegally occupying a space. So this quest is a reminiscence of free party enthusiasts searching for the ideal temporary autonomous zone, a concept developed by Hakim Bey to describe spaces where mainstream societal rules are suspended to make way for new forms of freedom and also solidarity. As other space, both physical and imaginate micro-festivals offer also a unique environment in which participants lose their sense of space, but also of time. So So these events, micro events, embody Foucault's principle of heterotopia. So the small scale encourages rediscovery of the festive experience, giving it renewed meaning. So human interaction regain a central place, and the perception of the work is no longer disturbed by intermediate elements such as, for example, giant screens or crowd or distances or etc. So this all made possible by the scenarization of the venue in the sense of narrating or structuring the micro-festival storyline. So this narrative is shaped by the venue staging, the immersive program and also lineup, and the proximity between participants. So the resulting atmosphere is reminiscent of the abandoned factories of Detroit in the late 80s, but also the warehouses in the United Kingdom, or for example, the Berlin cellars requisitioned after the fall of the wall, all of which fueled the techno movement. And when it comes to artistic experimentation, the proximity of the artist to the audience enables them to get to know their audience. So they have greater artistic freedom, but also freedom. And so there creates there is a horizontal relation between DJs and spectators and audiences. So this relationship, horizontal relationships, recalls the vibe of the early raves in Berlin and the free party in the French Grand West. And then this proximity fosters a sense of conviviality, such as in Mini Job is the example. So that is very absent at a larger festival. So following each reflection on the limit of growth, the experience deteriorates as a festival grows. So interactions become impoverished, cost increase, environmental impacts grows, etc., etc. So micro-festivals, which are more intimate, recreate a safe and friendly space with a particular focus on preventing sexual and sexist violence. And finally, the connection to the local area is very important because in the contrast, a micro-festival helping to revitalize rural areas. And in Berlin and Brandenburg, the region itself is responsible for the emergence of micro-festivals, providing the necessary material, cultural, symbolic resources. However, there is also a culture war on the territory because there is a conflict over the use and the control of festivals venues. So micro festivals rooted in the rave and free party tradition embrace artistic experimentation, temporary use of marginal spaces, and also close connections with audiences and local areas. So operating legally requires compromises that distance them from the heritage, yet they maintain a community spirit and alternative ethos. Overall, they diversify festival culture and demonstrate us that contemporary partying continues to engage with significant social, cultural, but also political issues. So here are some references. Oops. And thank you for your attention.
So before I begin, I just want to acknowledge that I live, work, and am speaking on Gundungurra and Darrell country, which is southwest of Sydney in Australia. And I acknowledge the traditional custodians, elders past, present, and emerging. And I extend this acknowledgement to any First Nations peoples who are present with us in the Zoom room. So the focus of my presentation is actually on night spectacles and the consideration for nocturnal wildlife within our urban nighttime environments, and questions around how we might do better when it comes to our shared more than human worlds. I'm going to give a brief introduction to night creatures in the city and then just focus on one night event, which I think kind of perfectly encapsulates the complexities and the questions that arise from this. And I just want to acknowledge that the general positive social aspects of night spectacles are not so much the focus here. It's rather how we can develop a more holistic sense and a better understanding, therefore, a better approach to the ways night spectacles are delivered in relation to our nocturnal co-inhabitants. So to begin, I am actually going to invite you to go on a short walk with me. We are walking through a forested gully in the city of Sydney. To our right is a creek line that eventually makes its way to a harbour estuary and reserve. The slopes are wooded and shaded with a tall canopy of tangled eucalypt and turpentine trees. Dappled light falls on the more leafy understory of she oaks and sweet pittosporum. Clinging to the ridge lines above are the architectural feats of humans. Their landscape gardens tumble down the slopes and meet the remnant bushland. Some merge and some spill over, while others halt neatly demarcated by fence lines. Beyond the background hum of city traffic, we hear water trickle and the tinkling calls of small woodland birds. The alert cries of a pied currawong attract our attention. We depart from the track to investigate, unsure what the ruckus is about. We remain still and wait. Our eyes slowly scan the bush for movement. Then they land on a large shadowy shape. Nestled within a leafy tree, only a few meters from the ground, we encounter the unconcerned countenance of Australia's largest night raptor, the powerful owl. So, in a city of pavements, roads, and housing blocks and car parks, it's hard to think of forests and woodlands, let alone the life they support. And we often separate these things, and we're mostly unaware of the night creatures cohabiting in close proximity. Yet, in the large urban parklands, reserves, and the remnant vegetation along waterways, the wilder environments of the once bushlands still cling. And some of these animals in Australia, particularly, have adapted to the growing city. Others have arrived because of environmental pressure, their previous habitats subject to land clearing, mostly, or radically changed due to the effects of drought, bushfire, or flood. And when these places can no longer offer the resources needed for the survival, the city with its parks and reserves offers refuge. And I think that this is a really important point to remember because this will continue to increase as our climate shifts. And so, for example, after the Black Summer fires in Australia in 2019-20, the East Coast cities saw an increase in large woodland birds and flying fox populations. Um, so, like once those habitats have recovered a little or regenerated, many will leave, but some will stay. And the threatened powerful owl has kind of done both. It's been forced out of its woodlands as the city expanded initially, and then has returned to repopulate bushland fragments as the larger surrounding forests shrink. And it is able to do so because there is a healthy population of city adapted possums. Um, and this is a ringtail possum. I think that came up. And they exist in high densities in parklands and backyards, much more so than they would in forest environments. And they play a here they still play a really important part in pollination and seed dispersal of plants. And they also kind of contribute to some biological control of their own. So particularly with feral, so-called feral species by predating on chicks of the common myna, for example. So for some people they're a pleasure and others they're a pest because they will also, have a little snack on people's backyard plants, and they will also kind of house and cozy down in sheds and roofs if there's no trees close by. But the growing population of the owls has returned a kind of biocontrol to the city, and that can contribute to keeping the possum populations in balance. So, like, this might seem kind of good, possums pollinating the city and owls keeping their populations under control, until we introduce a third element, and that is reproductive site fidelity. So site fidelity in this instance refers to the annual return to a maternal site. And we see this with flying foxes or megabat maternal camps, are what they're called. And to the point that one maternal camp in Sydney, for example, it still exists on this tiny fragment of vegetated creek line between a vast industrial estates and railway lines. And the female flying foxes return there every year, as they have done for hundreds of years. And so the powerful owl does a similar thing because nesting hollows are a really prized real estate for owls, mainly because they need a very large hollow and they can only be found in eucalyptus trees that are a minimum of 100 years old. So it's important also to understand that nesting hollows are also in high demand for nocturnal mammals and other woodland birds, and they're a rapidly diminishing resource that's not easily replaced. So the powerful owls will maintain and return a breeding hollow, and they will return to it year after year, and for some decades, and they will always so pass it on through generations. And one ecologist described how powerful owl makes a grieving sound when they lose a chick, and they've witnessed a breeding pair make the same kind of heartbreaking calls as they sat on a tree limb adjacent to where their annual nest tree had been destroyed by a recent bushfire. So in urban environments, the removal of old trees for aesthetic reasons or for issues around council liability has contributed to the scarcity of old growth hollows. And for the city owls, this adds another complexity. And this is what some ecologists call the ecological trap. So on one hand, the owls have plentiful food and adequate roosting sites, but on the other hand, when it comes to nesting options, they are extremely limited. And additionally, for powerful owls, they're really sensitive to disruption or excessive noise or activity when they're breeding, and that can result in them abandoning their nests and reproductive failure. So for example, a powerful owl pair in a park site in the middle of the city of Melbourne were documented across 2 breeding seasons. Both failed, and it's believed that human traffic and noise disturbance close to the nest were the likely factors. But when the pair located to another hollow that was less disturbed a few kilometres away, they successfully fledged 2 owlets. So that kind of brief overview brings me to why we need to understand these nocturnal entanglements a little more comprehensively when it comes to programming night spectacles in parklands. So in 2023, a Melbourne City Council revealed they would be hosting a large-scale multi-month event after dark. And that event was scheduled to run daily for 3 months from mid-autumn to mid-winter between the hours of 5:30 and 11 p.m. and bringing thousands of visitors to the site each night. So the event was Harry Potter, a Forbidden Forest experience, and it's a global touring experience. And it invites attendees along a nighttime woodland trail where elements from the Harry Potter film are brought to life through the iconic forest scenes. So publicity states that visitors can come face to face with magical creatures, including a hippogriff, and participate in wand duels and summon a Patronus to illuminate the dark woods. Now, the Dark Woods in this case is a wildlife sanctuary and home to nocturnal wombats, wallabies, and echidnas, to name a few. And it is located within the grounds of a shared National Trust and Shire-owned property that also includes a heritage homestead, venue hire spaces, nursery kiosk, and notably a community forest. So at the time of the event, it stated that it would only occupy a part of the sanctuary, and at the end of each evening, the woods would be returned to darkness. Now, that might sound fair, but what is important to understand is what that means in non-human terms. So the first half of the night is generally the most active part for nocturnal critters, and the smells and sounds of thousands of people filtering through the normally quiet woods will mask oral and olfactory cues for that they rely on. And so, like, the first part of the night is like the beginning of the day for humans. It's when the nocturnal animals wake and they start to forage and they have their first meal similar to breakfast. Um, However, light and disturbance can hinder or delay this activity, and this can have detrimental effects on physical health and reproduction. Nocturnal foragers also have finely tuned timeshare systems known as temporal partitioning, and this allows them to forage at particular times across the night and includes resting time. And this helps reduce competition with others while also reducing encounters with predators. Um, so now, when these timeshare arrangements that would normally take place across, say, a 12-hour period are compacted into 6, this kind of puts pressure on the animals the same ways as it would be if we were asked to fit everything we need to do in one day in half at the time. So, this results in heightened stress and kind of poor health outcomes for the animals. So, after a groundswell of concern from locals, a media campaign, and a national petition raising thousands of signatures, the council finally relocated the event to the community forest just 2 months before it was scheduled to open. And significant to that was the fact that the sanctuary is home to a powerful owl breeding pair, and that probably helped with the decision. But I just also, even so the outcome was great, it also kind of raises questions around charismatic species and what is considered worthy of caring about, and whether the campaign would have been successful if the owls were not present. So it's hard to understand why the community forest was not put forward by the council from the start. It was the more appropriate site. It had less biodiversity. It was more established for something like this. And, the reviews of the event kind of spoke of hundreds of speakers and LED lights and hour-long queues for photo opportunities, which, one can imagine were filled with like chatter and noise of families and impatient kids waiting their turn. So just to kind of finally, I'll probably just end there because I know we're running out of time and I'm trying to do this fast. But the initial decision then to host the event in the sanctuary seems to have been driven by the event producer's desire for a more authentic woodland experience, alongside the council's desire to secure the event with its associated economic benefits. And this highlights the easy slippage from valuable natural asset to economic resource, and also shows how the overlaying of human operational systems onto the other, being the non-human, as masked as care. So that is like they will return the woods to the dark at night. And yet it is important to realize that in reality, the difference for the experience for the audience would have actually been incredibly minor in comparison to the impact on the wildlife in the sanctuary. So look, I had another paragraph of just wrapping up and different ideas around this, but basically I'll just end with saying, we have an opportunity to kind of basically with our beautiful night cities and these kind of engaging activities to also engage with like questions around sensibility, nuance, and ethics from the onset, and that creative industries have an opportunity to understand their influence and lead by example. And that is to engage with questions of best practice for human and non-humans alike from the start. Because really, we're only truly creative when ethical approaches engage with a dialogue that questions why here and why not. Thank you very much. And that's the quick slide references, but I can send them to anyone if they're interested.